You've probably heard a coach or a lifting buddy tell you to really feel that muscle working during a set. It sounds like classic gym folklore, the kind of advice that's more vibes than science. Except in this case, the mind muscle connection actually has real research behind it, and understanding exactly when it helps and when it doesn't can meaningfully change how you train. Let's start with what it actually is. The mind muscle connection refers to deliberately directing your attention to the specific muscle you're trying to work during an exercise rather than just focusing on moving the weight from point A to point B. In practice, this means consciously feeling your biceps contract during a curl rather than just thinking about getting the dumbbell up to your shoulder. Exercise scientists call this the difference between an internal focus, attention on the muscle itself, and an external focus, attention on the outcome, like the bar path or the weight moving. So, what does the research actually show? A study published in the European Journal of Sport Science found that lifters using an internal, muscle-focused attention during training saw notably greater muscle thickness increases in their elbow flexors, 12.4%, compared to just 6.9% for those using an external movement-focused attention over the same training period. A separate study looking at push-ups found a 9% increase in pectoralis major activation when participants deliberately focused on contracting their chest muscles during the movement. Another study measuring bench press at 50% of 1 rep max found pectoralis activity rose by 22% when lifters used specific verbal cueing to focus on the chest muscle during the lift. Interestingly, that same research comparing internal and external focus found no significant difference in quadriceps growth between the two groups. That's an important detail, and it points to something worth understanding before you start obsessing over mind-muscle connection on every single exercise. Here's why it works better for some muscles than others. The pattern across the research is fairly consistent. The mind-muscle connection shows a clear benefit for upper body, single joint movements, biceps curls, chest flies, lateral raises, but a much smaller or negligible effect for large multi-joint lower body lifts like squats and leg presses. Compound lower body lifts recruit so many muscles simultaneously, quads, glutes, hamstrings, and core, that consciously redirecting focus to one specific muscle has less room to change activation patterns. Upper body isolation movements already involve a narrower, more controllable range of motion, which makes it much easier for your brain to selectively emphasize the target muscle. Here's a detail that surprises a lot of lifters. The mind-muscle connection's effect on muscle activation shrinks substantially as the weight gets heavier and largely disappears somewhere between 50 and 80% of your 1 rep max. At near maximal loads, your nervous system has to recruit essentially every available motor unit in the working muscles just to move the weight at all, regardless of where your attention is focused. This is exactly why the mind-muscle connection tends to matter most on lighter, controlled sets and matters far less on a heavy, near-max compound lift. So, how do you actually use it? Slow down your tempo. A controlled 2 to 3 second lowering phase gives you time to actually feel and direct tension into the target muscle. Use lighter weight on isolation exercises, since the effect works best under roughly 60 to 80% of your 1 rep max. Reduce momentum and swinging, since strict, controlled form naturally supports a stronger connection. Save it for isolation work, not your heaviest compound lifts. And use verbal or mental cues. Simply reminding yourself to feel the chest or squeeze the bicep during a set is enough to shift your attention meaningfully. Training experience changes how well this works too. Research specifically comparing untrained and resistance-trained participants found the effect is far more reliable in people with real lifting experience. Selectively directing more activation toward one muscle requires a certain level of neuromuscular coordination, the ability to consciously recruit specific motor units rather than relying on your body's default movement pattern. Beginners are still building that coordination from scratch while also learning basic exercise technique, which leaves little spare capacity for fine-tuned muscular focus. For someone with a year or more of consistent training, the nervous system has already built strong, efficient pathways for basic lifts, freeing up attention that can then be redirected toward emphasizing a specific muscle. If you want to test this yourself, pick an isolation exercise you're already familiar with. A bicep curl or a cable lateral raise works well. For one set, focus purely on completing the reps with your normal external focus. For a second set with the same weight after adequate rest, deliberately slow the tempo down and consciously focus on feeling the target muscle contract and stretch through the full range of motion. Most lifters who try this notice a clear subjective difference. often describing the second set as feeling like it worked the muscle harder despite using identical weight and reps. Let's also cover a simple way to test this yourself rather than just taking research at face value. Pick an isolation exercise you already know well, and for one set, focus purely on the outcome, moving the weight, hitting your target reps, nothing more. Then for a second, set with the same weight after adequate rest. Deliberately slow the tempo down and consciously focus on feeling the target muscle contract and stretch through the full range of motion. Most people who try this notice a clear difference right away, and that subjective feeling lines up closely with what the actual muscle activation research shows. A few misconceptions are worth clearing up. It's not a replacement for progressive overload. It's a modifier that can enhance a well-structured training program, not a substitute for adding weight, reps, or sets over time. It doesn't mean every rep needs to feel like meditation. Simple, practical cueing captures most of the benefit. It's not equally useful for every lift. Applying intense focus to a heavy compound lift generally produces little extra benefit, and beginners shouldn't stress over it. Technique and consistency should come first. Let's talk through a quick comparison table you can keep in mind. For muscle group, it helps most with upper body, biceps, chest, shoulders, and helps less with large lower body muscle groups like quads. For exercise type, it helps most with isolation movements and helps less on heavy compound lifts. For load, it helps most at light to moderate weight, under 60 to 80% of your 1 rep max, and helps less at near maximal weight. For training experience, it helps most for intermediate to advanced lifters and helps less for complete beginners. And for rep tempo, it helps most with slower, controlled reps and helps less with fast, explosive reps. It's also worth understanding why heavy weight blunts this effect so much, since it trips up a lot of lifters who assume more focus always equals more benefit. The reason comes down to basic motor control. At near maximal loads, there simply isn't extra capacity left over to selectively emphasize activation through mental focus alone, since the lift already demands maximum effort from every fiber involved, regardless of what you're thinking about. This is exactly why the mind-muscle connection tends to matter most on lighter, controlled sets, like the final few reps of a hypertrophy-focused isolation exercise, and matters far less on a heavy, near-max compound lift like a 3-rep max squat or deadlift. One more practical point worth mentioning. This technique pairs especially well with exercises where cheating or momentum is easy to sneak into the movement. Bicep curls, lateral raises, and cable flies are all exercises where swinging the weight or using body English can quietly take over the rep without you even noticing. Deliberately focusing on the target muscle naturally makes that kind of cheating much harder to get away with, since your attention is locked on to whether the muscle itself is doing the work, rather than just whether the weight technically made it to the top of the movement. The mind-muscle connection is one of the rare pieces of gym wisdom that actually holds up under research scrutiny, at least under the right conditions. It works best on upper body isolation exercises at light to moderate weight, with slower, controlled reps, and it matters far less on heavy compound lifts where near maximal loads already demand full muscle recruitment regardless of focus. Use it as a tool to sharpen your isolation work, not as a replacement for the fundamentals, adding weight, reps, or sets over time that actually drive long-term muscle growth. Full breakdown, with the practical self-test and every misconception explained, is linked below.